First of all, welcome to Casual Connect in San Francisco for the first time. That's amazing. This next session, Enlivening the Dead, Telling Tales Socially, I have the pleasure of introducing someone who I know personally and who I consider a friend. This next gentleman is a game industry veteran, a designer and developer for over 15 years with a focus on multiplayer gameplay and storytelling. He is currently the VP of Online at Telltale Games, developers of The Walking Dead, among other great franchises. He co-founded iWin and Double Coconut and has authored several best-selling books about internet technologies and culture. Here to talk about telling tales socially, let's please welcome Mr. David Fox.
Thanks, Phil. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me more or less okay? Cool. Thanks so much for coming. So we care a whole lot about narrative at Telltale. I care a whole lot about narrative as a human being. Hopefully you care too. And some of the reasons we care are really good business reasons. So on one hand, it's a completely untapped market. You look at all the games out there, and we believe there's a sweet spot between interactive entertainment, which is 99% of the games there, which are purely fiddling with stuff, and passive entertainment, which is TV, movies, books, where you're consuming stuff and sitting back. We think there's a whole new spot there that we can exploit. Stories and narrative also has universal appeal. So a good story, as seen time and time again, appeals to not just potential niche audiences, but can be very mass market. And additionally, good storytelling is extremely defensible. You can't clone, fast follow, or copy a good story the way you can with so much else in games. We also like narrative because it translates well across platforms. So once you have a good story and a good engine to tell that story, it's not that difficult to get it to play on mobile, tablet, to get it to play on consoles. And in fact, at Telltale, all of our games run everywhere from the highest end console to a cheap handheld. But I think most importantly, we like narrative in gaming because it has the most headroom for innovation. So unlike things like physics, AI, controllers, and of course graphics, there are improvements, and it's really exciting to see those improvements, but they're very incremental. With narrative, we think there's whole mountains to be conquered, entire revolutionary places, as well as evolutionary places to go. So that really excites us. And I think the final and most important reason why narrative is important is stories affect people, right? Like nothing else, stories will affect you. I forgot the poet who said it, but a good narrative, a good story is like a door that you go through, and sometimes it's not you who comes back. The best game of the world, the most challenging game of the world cannot achieve that. But let's look at the history of computer games. And for most of computer games histories, story, much like the formatting of the slides, sucked. Even for great games, it's not much of a story. I mean, who would want to see a story about a plumber saving a princess against some lizards? There's not much there. And it's kind of become almost cliche that cutscenes are kind of a blah thing. In fact, you look at player comments on forums time and time again. They're like, I just want to get to the game, skip the cutscene. Doesn't matter how well produced it is. It doesn't matter how good the story and the writing is. It's often doesn't really work. Even good tech-done stories, in this case, a game like Jewel Quest, it's cool, but it's really supplementary to the game itself. You could think of it almost as scenery or as narrative, as a particle effect. It's a spice. It's cool. It's good, but it's not a core ingredient to why you're playing that game. And in the casual space, of course, there's a whole lot of stories. Stories become more and more important as hidden object games have evolved. But still, there's something that doesn't really quite resonate with the story and what you're doing as a gamer. You're not going to see many Agatha Christie or Ian Fleming novels where the lead character is looking through a pathologically messy room for a mutant chameleon. I mean, that's not really part and parcel of myth and story that we care about. So even in the best case, take a game like BioShock. Has anyone here played BioShock? Okay, a few. Good. That's pretty good for a casual connect. The story's incredible. It's really a lot of care has been put into crafting the story and making it work with the gameplay. But one of the branches of the story has you playing as someone who's very selfless and giving, whereas in the gameplay, you're basically trying to kill everything and take as much as you can for yourself. So there's a real dissonance when you're playing that game. And I think the designer's name is Clint Hawking, who coined this term, ludonarrative dissonance. And it's really easy to see why. I mean, it's anyone who's tried writing, anyone who's successfully written, or even better yet, failed to write a good story, you know how difficult it is to balance characters, environment, and plot. And once you've got that balance perfect and it's all working, when you throw in interactivity and you let a player mess with the characters, mess with the plot, mess with the environment, very easy for things to go out of whack. So that's the reason why throughout history, when you look at games and look at stories that have been good in games, it's usually action stories, right? And there's a reason for that. It's because as a gamer, you're taking action. You're doing a sport, essentially. You're doing something almost very physical. So the stories that are physical and action work. And that's fine. That's a lot of great genres, right? There's the detective genre, the alien invasion genre, war, obviously. A lot of great stories there. But you know, when you pull back and look at what stories can do through great TV writing, great movie writing, and of course, great books, it's not even close as far as touching the psychology of human beings, which is what great stories do. They get you in there, you're understanding how people think, you're really thinking about how you think and the decisions you've made in your life, and only a great story can do that. Not just action stories, but psychological, really character-driven stories. So let's give an example here of how to take what's kind of a typical gameplay trope and take it from a game story to a actually truly harmonious ludonarrative story. So imagine you need to get into some lab to get a serum to save the world. And there's this old guard who's standing at the front of the lab, and you need to somehow trick this guard into getting in and getting the serum. So in a typical adventure game, you would kind of wander around the environment. You would maybe randomly find a fifth of bourbon in a trash pile. You'd click on it. It would go to your inventory. You then go to the guard. You would drag the bottle to the guard. The guard would drink it, wander around, stumble. You'd go into the lab and save the world. Okay, that's okay gameplay. Pretty crappy story. Now, what if instead you visit this guard night after night? He puts you off most of the time, but after you start to show genuine interest in your dialogue with him, he actually starts to form a relationship. And then one gloomy night, you slip him a little bourbon from your flask, takes a few sips, you start probing a little about his personal life, tells you a little bit more, tells you a little bit about his childhood, some pretty bad things with his father. You've gone a little too far. You come back the next night, you give him a little more bourbon, push him a little further. Finally, he unleashes the secret way to get into the lab that he really shouldn't be saying, and you use that information later to get into the laboratory. That's cool gameplay and cool story. Sorry, so get rid of that drag and drop. So at Telltale, we've released a game, The Walking Dead, which has done quite well. I think, who here has played The Walking Dead? Great, cool. So I won't go into what makes it great, other than to say we really focus on story above and beyond anything else. In fact, some critics claim that it's too much of a story. It's not a game. You're just playing interactive fiction. We obviously disagree, but it is true that all of the mechanics in the game, the physical click mechanics, are always in service to the story. So when you click to kill a zombie with your gun, our intent is not to have this big wall of meat that you're blowing past to get to the end of the level. Our intent is for you to feel the way you really would feel if something that's not quite human, but still human, standing in front of you, and the disgust you'd feel, the visceral fear you'd feel, the pity you'd feel when you blew that thing away, that thing that really is human, but just a bit hungrier. Cool, okay, so we got some narrative and some harmony and some Ludo, and it's all good stuff. So why now worry about social? Why make that complicate things even further? Well, again, there's some really strong business reasons to focus on social, right? So when you have a good story or a good game, putting viral elements in the game amplifies that word of mouth, really gets it going from something that creates minor buzz to a major sensation. putting other players in the story, or at least being able to touch your players as game makers, leads to engagement. So at Telltale, our games are very episodic, and it's really important for us to have touch points with our players between episodes and make sure that they're still thinking of the game and caring about the game between episodes, between seasons, and between titles. And additionally, we really, really care about feedback loops. So we do a lot of analytics as much as we can to understand what people like and don't like, or where they've had trouble in the games. But we also care a whole lot about discussion, what people think about our games. We really mine hard for that feedback and to really understand the core things that people really loved and didn't like about the game. But again, here's that word effect. You know, the real reason that social is so important in games, and especially storytelling games, is it adds to the effect. People affect each other. When you do things with other people involved, it's just intensified, it's stronger, you remember it more, it's more meaningful. I think that's a pretty fair blanket statement. So in looking for how to combine story and community or other players or society, we could look at some real world examples of where people consume stories together. So obviously the first example is the theater, right? People go to movie theaters and plays, and it's a completely different experience than sitting at home in your living room watching something. So one very typical way of doing this, and successful way that Pogo had, was the kind of alone in a crowd feeling, where you're playing a single player game, but there's a chat room at the side, and you may or may not even participate in the chat. You may or may not even know these people, but it makes you feel like you're in a fun place, that there's a lot going on, that other people are involved. It's a completely different feeling than playing alone. At Telltale, we try to get some of this theater feeling with what we call our stats system. So after you play an episode, we tell you how you did versus what the rest of the community did. And this not only shows you the possibility space for the story and some of the things that people might have done that you didn't even know were possible, but it also shows you kind of how similar to the crowd or different from the crowd you really are in your moral choices. And more with players who, or people I should say, who like to put their lives online, we think there's something really strong about a game that plays with this idea of surveillance, a game that lets you understand or know that at certain times people might be watching you. So certain moral choices you make in the game, how would those change, or how would those be amplified if you knew your friends would be judging you based on those choices? So that's kind of interesting. The second paradigm for people and combining people and society and stories is, of course, the watering hole. So whether that's a book discussion group, whether that's getting together over the coffee mug in the dorm, over the coffee machine in the dorm or in the office, it's a place where you're talking about that thing you saw on TV last night. It's a place, or that movie you just saw over the weekend. There's something great about rehashing that story with other people. So obviously, with the advent of Twitter and Facebook and Vine and you name it, we work very, very, very hard to cultivate those communities, to be involved with those communities, and that's wonderful for us. And that's not news. I'm sure everybody is doing that. But we believe in this water cooler effect so much that we actually built our own community. So we looked at all the out-of-the-box forum solutions out there, and all of them were sufficient, but not excellent. And so we really built a system that was tailored to the way that our players want to talk about games after they're done playing them. So it does stuff like know how far you've gotten in the game. It'll reveal or hide spoilers based on how far you've gotten in the game. It will allow you to be threaded and connected to different people depending on where you've gotten in the game. So some very, very cool systems in there. And additionally, we focus on that discussion forum not just being a forum and standalone space. The people will visit telltalegames.com and go there, and that's great. But really, it's a platform, it's a hub. So we're trying to bridge Facebook and Twitter and marketing events where we let players vote on certain things, where we let players make decisions which may actually affect the writing and the outcome of future episodes and future titles. So those two things, the movie theater and the watering hole, are interesting, but they're admittedly a little meta. We're not really, I talked about innovation. We're not really being innovative there. We're more kind of plowing ground that's already been well planted. that's a metaphor. So at Telltale, we also have a lot of experiments going on. So these experiments are ways to take society or take social play and put it inside of the game, inside of the story. So one thing we've played with is the idea of a mob. So imagine that you're playing your game, you're a character, and there's a tyrant that's part of the story, and you're trying to oust this tyrant. What if there's real-world events, real-time events that you go to, and you can choose to be violent, or you can choose to be very non-violent, and you can choose to lead or kind of form a cluster of violence or non-violence based on your action and based on other players' actions around you. Very, very cool, and the entire outcome of the plot and story could depend based on what you do. The other thing that we're experimenting with is cooperative action. So this shows the game Curiosity. Has anybody played Curiosity or know about it? So it's basically a very simple and cool experiment put out there. It's a cube, and thousands, I think tens of thousands of players log in, and they just click on the cube, and whoever gets to the center pixel in the cube gets a big prize. So that could be applied to story as well. That notion of, imagine somewhere in the game there's a street urchin, and you have the choice as an individual player to slip the street urchin one of your hard-earned coins, or to kick the street urchin in the face and get him out of your way, or to just ignore him. And depending on your action that you take and the action of thousands of other players around you, that street urchin will either develop into a villainous character or into a hero character, sidekick that helps you. The other really cool experiment is looking at games like Dark Souls, where in that game, as you walk around, you'll see messages in the ground, and if you click on the messages, you'll read them, and there actually are messages that other players have left about what to be aware of or what to be careful of, and it's a really, really cool feeling that, wow, there have been hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of other people here before me, and the bad messages get rated away very quickly, and the good messages get rated up very quickly. And that's a very, very powerful feeling of humanity all around you. But of course, the gold standard that has to be mentioned. Who here has played Journey? Cool. So if you've played Journey, you realize the almost religious experience you have in you're playing, and at a certain point, there's a companion with you. And the companion seems to be an AI. It does a lot of the same things you do. You can't really communicate with the companion other than a little bit of singing. And sometimes it hinders you a little bit. Sometimes it helps you a little bit. You could actually play without the companion entirely. But at the end, you're walking through the snow, and you begin to realize as you're making shapes in the snow, the shapes that your companion is making have to be another human. There's no way AIs can be responding to you that way. And indeed, at the very end, after the credits, it tells you the name of the person that's been your companion. So you are literally playing this game the entire time with another person. It's a simple thing to say, but when you experience it, it pulls back, and the game just becomes this experience you've had that affects you on a whole other level. So we're playing with some of those ideas. And finally, the thing we were playing with is the idea of a player-controlled co-star. So this would involve actually your character in a game, the other player is a character in a game, and you're in the game together at the same time. Yeah, so it's almost like an interactive murder mystery, which perhaps is another real-world paradigm, where many people are in the world at the same time, experiencing the same thing. Another human being is a supporting actor in your story, you're a supporting actor in their story. So it's very, very cool. As you can imagine, very, very, very difficult to pull off, because balancing story with interactivity, or one-person interactivity, is difficult enough. But when you start involving another person or many people in there, it's really, really difficult to keep things balanced. Now, just because it's difficult doesn't mean it's impossible. We don't think there's going to be a gimmicky way to solve this. We don't think there's anything like that. We think it's going to take a lot of hard work. It's going to be like juggling a meat cleaver. And eventually, after a lot of scars and a lot of mistakes, we think we'll figure it out, and hopefully other folks are working on it as well. And when it happens, we believe we're going to create a new form of media that's honestly more affecting than TV, than novels, or than any game today. I know that's kind of a grandiose statement, but I think it's true. So thank you so much for your time, and it was a pleasure speaking to you.
We have time for questions. Questions?
Hi, I was just wondering how, I know you have Laura, but I just wondered how big your social media team is, if it's such a big play in development, please.
Sorry, I missed the question.
Sorry, how big is your social media team is really what I was asking.
Well, so we have an entire online team, and we have a big marketing team, and we work in concert. So we don't have a social media team per se, but everybody is wading in those waters.
Hey, David.
Hey, Mark.
How do you guys handle metrics, given that you guys have such a heavy narrative focus? Is there a specific way that you guys might engage or handle or read metrics versus somebody who might be making like a match 3 type game? Have you found differences in that at all?
Yeah, we're doing a lot of that, but huge differences because we release episodically. So, unlike a Flash game where you can pump out another thing in a week, or a mobile game where you can pump out another thing in a few weeks, we really have to apply the metrics we're learning to the next episode. So it's kind of a hybrid between the box product cycle and the social gaming cycle. But we're getting faster and coming up with more tricks.
Hey, David. On iOS, the first episode is free, right? How much experimentation have you guys done with free-to-play business models in being inserted into sort of narrative, gameplay, episodic deliveries?
I think you basically just put your finger on the experiment we've done, and it's been a good experiment. But Telltale Games work across consoles all the way down to to mobile. So a lot of the platforms don't support really free-to-play economies. So we're right now focused on episodic releases.
Anybody else?
Hi, David. So on mobile, a lot of the games being released tend to be bite-sized, like to accommodate shorter play sessions. And so a lot of the narrative or story elements tend to be very contextual, like the examples that you showed. Where do you think and how do you think mobile game developers in that area can elevate narrative or involve it in more ways than just being a context that's being provided to the player?
That's a great question and a tough conflict. I think if you look at any good story that's affected you in any medium, it has to be a certain length to kind of get into it and really be involved with the characters and care. And I don't know if there's a way around that, but we are experimenting. I guess that's the most I can say there.
Anybody else? Well then, thank you. And please let's thank David for sharing some of Telltale's experience with us.